In the first half of the 21st century, a strange new craze had begun sweeping the world. Its exact origins are lost to history, but it would eventually come to resonate with the vast majority of people with access to Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. But not so much X, though. As this phenomenon took hold, people all over the world wanted to have their portraits painted while balancing food on their heads. The creation of personal portraits has been common practice since antiquity. Emperors, kings, and nobility from civilizations throughout recorded history have placed great value on this art form, and some of the finest surviving examples of ancient art that exist today are portraits of the most important people of those times. But fast forward hundreds of years to the 2000s, and we began seeing average people commissioning artists in droves to create masterpieces depicting themselves wearing food. Of course, fine portraits convey prestige, social importance, and a sense of worth. And yet, during this period, displaying them alongside one's other most precious heirlooms had become even more than a status symbol. So long as there was something edible on the cranium. Beginning in the mid-2020s, proudly displaying uniquely individual masterpieces depicting food on the head had become a genuine societal expectation, not unlike the need to cover your nipples in public. As people across cultures and levels of society created more and more demand for food-on-the-head paintings, artists of all stripes had found themselves highly sought after in an attempt to meet it. Clients of limited means sought simple, basic depictions of themselves that could be produced by amateur artists or even unsophisticated AI drawing programs. Those with greater wealth, however, would seek out the more accomplished artists of the day to paint incredibly lifelike and vivid images of themselves sporting their favorite meals. It was often asked why this particular style of portraiture had become so appealing. After all, until then, being covered with food was considered undignified. Then, seemingly overnight, the notion of egg on your face was no longer a fate worthy of embarrassment. To understand this, you have to see it in the context of the period. Food insecurity was on the rise worldwide. Climate change was devastating crops, and arable land was drying out. The food supply itself had even become fair game as a target of warfare, with farmland, grain stores, and shipping lines increasingly at risk from conflict. It was a low point in our history, when even the most basic of human rights was becoming endangered by hatred and greed. This reality made two things vividly apparent. One, food was no longer taken for granted and was in fact frequently on people's minds. And two, having food available was something to be grateful for. From the standpoint of average denizens of the world, portraying themselves with food on their heads reflected both of these truths and in turn became an emblem of the times. It was, in a literal sense, a way to show that food really was on their minds. And it was also the next best thing to a belt-busting belly to flaunt that they had it. As the world's predicament grew ever more dire and the food-on-head portrait craze reached fever pitch, even celebrities started participating. They used their considerable resources to commission the best artists in the world for their portraits. Before long, they were concocting increasingly outlandish compositions in an attempt to outdo each other. Given the times, it was certainly in poor taste. However, it was also exactly what you would expect of human nature. And so, Instagram profiles lived and died by the reception that the food portraits they shared could garner. Whether or not these portraits were displayed in living rooms and offices where they truly belonged didn't even seem to matter, which made it all the more pathetic. It didn't take long for world leaders and other political office holders to begin participating too. In fact, those in power understood that to lack a personal food portrait easily called into question their legitimacy as leaders. And so, people in all levels of government, whether they were current holders of office or those who were previously in positions of power, ensured that they too could display food-on-head portraits to the world. As the craze reached its peak, nations whose heads of state lacked portraits of themselves crowned in food even had their sovereignty questioned. And then, of course, there were also a few who just didn't get it. While the origins of this bizarre movement are forever cloaked in mystery, we do know that it finally came to an end at around the same time that Dr. Balvis Shenanigoid popularized the tradition of posing naked with your meal before Christmas dinner. And today, no study of the people living in the 21st century can be complete without a deep examination of their sudden and insatiable need to be depicted in portrait with food balanced on their heads. It's a miracle the artificial intelligence allowed us to survive.